Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cincy Law Cast. Today, we have a very special guest, one of the newer additions to the UC Law team, Julie Leftwich. And I'm going to throw it over to her to introduce herself and what she does here at UC Law.
Joe, it's great to be here. As you said, I'm Julie Leftwich. I am the new Director of International Peace and Security Initiatives here at the College of Law. March is Women's History Month, and March 8th is International Women's Day. And in celebration of this month and of International Women's Day, I'm so happy to be here talking about my work and about the International Peace and Security Initiative, a new initiative here at the UC College of Law. I think it's the perfect time to be able to be kicking off our activities and talking to everybody about what we're doing. And looking at all the accomplishments of women, and especially women peace builders in the world today. I officially came on board last August, and I am developing a new Center for International Security.
Awesome. That is great. And we're going to get into that a little bit. But before we get into the new projects and initiatives you're going to be bringing to UC Law, I want to get to know you a little bit better. So what brought you to this want and desire to be an advocate for international issues, international women, and other things that are happening? What kind of was that catalyst for you?
So I go back really to my, maybe high school days, even before that. I was always, really from the time I was very young, I was always interested in international things. I loved learning languages. I loved other cultures. I originally wanted to be a professional dancer growing up, and my parents were willing to support all of my curricular activities for that, but not doing it as a career. So when I was in high school, both of my parents started talking to me about going to law school. My father, for whatever reason, thought I would be a good lawyer, and my mother said, "Well, you'll always have that degree." Which, in later years I appreciated because she was just trying to make sure I'd be independent. But at any rate, I went to college at Brandeis University in Boston. And, I really thought about studying international affairs. And my college years were really formative. I should say, before and even maybe the beginning of college, I knew I wanted to do something international, but, I had romantic notions more of, I could travel and I write. I love to write. So, it was kind of more general like that. But my college years were really formative. I was in college from 1991 to 1995. And during those years, we had, the breakup of the former Yugoslavia and the wars in the Balkans and the horrible conflict in Bosnia. And then in 1994, there was the Rwandan genocide. And, I think these were kind of the earlier days of CNN and the first time that we were really, seeing conflicts play out on TV in real time. And I remember, seeing clips and hearing about just the horrible violence that was happening in Bosnia. And, I remember hearing about rape camps and all kinds of sexual violence. And it was just really horrible. And, I think maybe it was my junior year. I remember I had it was probably some kind of international affairs course or maybe Africa studies. Anyway, I had a teacher, a professor who from I don't remember which country, but he was from Africa. And again, this is when the Rwandan genocide was going on. So anyway, during those years, I really thought more about rather than just traveling the world and writing. That I would want to work more on these kinds of issues, inspiration. So I did end up my senior year of college. I ended up applying for law school here at the University of Cincinnati. And I was accepted, but I decided to defer it because I wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do. So I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. And just because of my language skills, I ended up working with an immigration attorney there. And I really had an epiphany one day. I was up in Baltimore and I had to take some documents for a client what was then called the Immigration and Nationality Service. And I was sitting in the harbor, and I was just thinking about, how much I was enjoying working with these clients. And so I had this epiphany that I could do some good with this law degree thing. So I decided to go ahead and come back to Cincinnati. I didn't mention before, I'm from Cincinnati. I grew up here in Cincinnati. I've been back and forth like many people. So I came back to Cincinnati, and I started here at UC Law, and I studied with the Urban Morgan Institute for Human Rights. So I really knew going into law school that I wasn't going to have a traditional law career, that I wanted to study human rights and, work as a human rights advocate. And one of the things I've always really loved, and I think I knew this going into it, was really taking the international frameworks, like all these big, international laws that we have and frameworks that we have, and at this really high level, but demystifying them for people and helping people understand, whether, from the official level, from the level of governments and parliaments and Congress, or down to the most grassroots of organizations, demystifying these laws and helping people understand how to actually use them in their advocacy in a practical way. So, that was kind of my sense going through law school. After I graduated from law school, I actually ended up moving to Spain. And while I was there, I did get my master's in international relations, which is kind of where I had started before I decided to go to law school. That's what I thought about doing. So anyway, I ended up getting all my degrees. Eventually I was in Boston for several years, but eventually came back here to Cincinnati. And, again, I wanted to do something in international work, which, especially at that time was here in Cincinnati. But I had I had lunch with Professor Bert Lockwood, who's the director of the Morgan Institute. And he told me about the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center here in Cincinnati. They were developing a program around human trafficking. So, I talked with the folks there, and they hired me to help develop this program. And through that, there was a lot of advocacy locally, a lot of training and advocacy that we did locally around human trafficking, but also working a lot with, international NGOs, non-government organizations based in Washington, D.C. that were working on issues of human trafficking. Again, really my specialty, even with the local trainings, was taking those international frameworks that we have and kind of understanding how to use international or national and local law and policy in advocacy. So that position ended in 2008 when we had the big crash in the economy, and the program was eliminated. So I thought, well, I'm kind of probably done with what I can do here in Cincinnati. So I went back to DC. And initially, when I went back, I was working with the International Association of Women Judges, works with judges around the world, women judges, to incorporate human rights into the courtroom. And from there, I was able over the years to work with a lot of different organizations. So, I'd done the human trafficking work, and then I really had brought in more to the, gender, the women's rights work. But it was probably around 2010, 2011, I went to a panel in DC. And afterwards, I was talking to one of the panelists. She's the head of well, at the time it's called Gender and Peacebuilding. Now it's called Women, Peace and Security at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And I gave her my card, and she saw that JD after my name. And she said, "Oh, you're a lawyer." And I said, "Well, I'm trained as one." And I have to say, up until that time, I did kind of go to law school, kind of kicking and screaming, but and it's still at that time, I was like, "Well, was that really useful?" But that's when I started to understand like how useful that degree was going to be. So she asked me to do exactly what I loved. The USIP was developing its initial course on gender and peace building for practitioners, people like people from government agencies like the Department of State, USAID, and also a lot of non-governmental organizations to understand how to bring gender and women, peace and security into their work. So again, my part was to take those international frameworks that we have around women, peace and security, and help people to understand how to use those not just in the legal sense, but in advocacy. Most of the people in the room weren't even lawyers. So that really channeled my energies and my passion more specifically into the peace and security field, which is it's a global agenda. It's specifically about making sure that women are at the table in all conflict resolution, peace building, decision making activities. But more broadly, it's really about getting to the root causes of conflict. And again, it arose out of just as my passion for this advocacy arose in the kind of early mid 90s. This movement also arose from those conflicts at that time because we were seeing the effects that they were having, especially on women and children. Obviously, there's always been in death and sexual violence and war, but starting especially with those conflicts in the 90s with Bosnia and Rwanda, we started seeing things like sexual violence actually being used as a tool, as a part of war, not just what people label collateral damage. So, women really started to come together around the world and say, hey, look, this is conflicts today are really affecting us in horrible ways and different ways than they affect men, and we need to talk about it and people understand it, and we also have to be a part of. So, so since then, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different organizations. I've worked with National Democratic Institute, NDI, Freedom House, U.S. institutions, of course, and many other big ones and small ones. So in those years, just basically since meeting Kathleen, my career has focused a lot on women and security, and some examples of work that I did before I moved back to Cincinnati. With the U.S. Institute of Peace, I was working with in the Great Lakes region of Africa, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. So we were looking at Uganda and Rwanda had both had horrible conflicts, but they, were down the road in their post-conflict systems in terms of institutions and laws, and that, at least on paper, incorporated all the human rights principles and gender equality, women's rights, and things like that. So we were looking at my colleague that I was working with. She was Ugandan and had been a judge in Uganda, also part of the Human Rights Commission. Now she's a member of Parliament. But anyway, since the 90s, she had been very involved in all of the peace project processes in the region. So we did case studies in Uganda, Rwanda, and we talked to people who had actually been a part of this process to kind of look behind the curtain and say, okay, we have, all these frameworks around women, peace, and security. We have international law. Did you use these? Like when you were advocating for, when you were writing the Constitution and putting laws back together in the justice sector back together, how did you use these frameworks? So again, really going to the root of how we use them. And then we were working in South Sudan at the time was a new country. So there's a lot of hope, and they were working on the Constitution and their laws and policies in the justice sector. So we were training, doing trainings and workshops with groups there, women especially, that were doing advocacy around these things. So that was just an example. And out of that as well, I published a toolkit called Women, Peace, and Security, Using Law to Empower Women in Post-Conflict Systems. So, that title itself is very indicative of what a lot of my career has been. Not a traditional lawyer. I never have been. I've never worked for a law firm actually at all. But it's using law as a tool to empower people and empower women. Another example, before I moved back into Cincinnati in 2017, I had an international assignment with NDI. I was working with their Syria program, and they were doing a program that was working with Syrian human rights defenders who were trying to have conversations in their communities about various things, but this particular program was around sexual violence in conflict. So, they wanted to understand how to one, talk to people in their communities about it, because it's sensitive topic to begin with, but especially in traditional cultures, So how to talk about it. But again, what are the laws? What are the policies, from the international level down to the local level, which in Syria is, of course, very complicated. So I learned so much from them in terms of, the day-to-day, who is in charge in each area, which could vary between different rebel groups. So I was in Gaziantep, Turkey, because of course nobody could actually work in Syria. So we were near the border, and during this week-long training, I had a group of Syrian refugees who were doing, human rights advocacy work in Turkey. But then we had a whole group of about 20 people who we teleconferenced in from Idlib province in Syria. Been one of the main points of the fighting since 2011, and so this is just kind of a illustrative story of some of the work I've done, but how amazing it is to work with people, and especially women around the world who are doing this work. I mean, these people, and there were both men and women in this group. The group that was in Idlib province with us were literally in the middle of war. I mean, there were bombs going off the conference center where they were meeting. But again, they were thinking about these issues. At that time, there was hope that there would be some kind of justice for Syria. But it's just, amazing experiences like that have been so inspiring. And, there are a lot of stories I could tell. But moving on from that, so I came back to Cincinnati in 2017. I swore I'd never come back. Every time I've left Cincinnati, I thought I would never come back. But I did. And it was really for personal reasons. I wasn't following a job. And I was continuing to do DC-based work. I was doing consulting work and going back and forth. But that summer of 2017, I was catching up with an old friend. And, I told her what I'd been up to. I hadn't seen her in like 10 years. So I told her what I'd been up to. And then she told me what she'd been up to. And she said, now that you're back in Cincinnati, what do you want to do? And I'd been thinking about it in terms of, maybe doing something more locally, at least for a while, settling down instead of running around to DC and around the world. But anyway, she told me about this tremendous need that the community was seeing here in Cincinnati for affordable and accessible immigration legal services, because in the 10 years leading up to that, there'd been such a growth in refugees coming. And she had been instrumental in working with Cincinnati public schools to develop what they call community learning centers, which are centers within the schools that serve students and families, but also the broader community, and provide all kinds of services. I mean, they were providing classes and job skills training, medical health services, things like that. But what she had been trying to do for the past couple of years was find a way to get in immigration legal services into these centers. And she said, "Is that something you'd be interested in?" I said, "Absolutely, let's do it." So we started the Immigrant and Refugee Law Center that fall of 2017. We opened our doors in Roberts Academy. So Roberts Academy is a school here in Cincinnati, a K-8 school, that had been one of the schools that had really seen a huge uptick in the number of immigrant and refugee families. I think it had gone from 0 to like 67% English language learners within the span of those 10 years. So, that's really where they had been primarily identifying this need. So we actually opened our doors. The office, we were in school, so a very unique setup. We were in the school. And RLC provides pro bono immigration legal services to low-income immigrant refugee families community. But through all of that work, I continue to really kind of look not just at the cases that we were dealing with in the present moment, but as is always my passion, what is happening in these countries? What are the human rights violations? What are the issues? What are the drivers? Why are people needing to leave? Because most of the people we were working with really were leaving very. And I always continued to frame everything under that peace and security umbrella, which I think is a very useful umbrella, because it really is about broadening, helping people understand what peace and security is. Because it's not just about securing borders and militaries and, protecting governments and countries and things like that. Although we are seeing more of that in recent years, but, so much of conflict, especially since the Cold War ended, as I said, have been these brutal conflicts, between different groups within the same countries. They're often not international, and tremendous types of violence and sexual violence and all kinds of things that we're seeing. But it really takes a human perspective, which kind of going back to the whole women, peace, and security agenda. And when I said it was really about getting to the root causes of conflict, because it's proven that when women are at the table, they are looking more at the issues, like what's happening in the communities. Why did we get to this conflict in the first place, rather than the traditional kind of men who are around the table that basically are saying who's going to have power when we lay down our arms, going to have what role in the government and such. So anyway, like I said, it's a very broad umbrella to look at all the things that count as security today from a human perspective, like food security, environment, economic security, political security, kind of all the things that go into day-to-day lives, really, that be stable and help communities and countries be stable. So at any rate, I can continue to stay affiliated with the law school. We IRLC worked a lot with UC Law students as externs. I also am teaching at the university, and I also continue to do consulting work with based organizations on women, peace, and security. But when our, I guess, not so new dean, Dean Hamoudi, started last August of 2023. So he actually reached out to me, on the advice of various people, to talk about, because he's, has big vision and has brought a lot of fresh perspective to the law school, and has been looking at innovative ways to, expand experiences for students, expand the international programming here. So we sat down for lunch one day, and of course hit it off immediately, and just started talking about ideas of things that we could do at the law school. We, we're starting at the point of the immigration work, because that's what I was doing at the time. But I said, what my real passion beyond that is looking at the the human rights side and the peace and security issues and women's rights. So we started talking about a concept of working around that. And eventually came up with the idea of developing a Center for International Peace and Security.
So I'm gonna jump in real quick, because I wanted to ask a question. When you're having this conversation with the dean now in 2023, is it because that lack is still there, or because now there is such a population and an increased population of not only immigrants but also refugees, that this is something that needs to be made to not grow with the population, but just handle what is going on, not just obviously in Cincinnati, but around the world? Or is it something of, there isn't this presence here in Cincinnati, let's build it and bring it up?
Well, it's both, really. Certainly the population, just Cincinnati as a city, has changed a lot, from the time I was growing up, and even when I was in law school. It's really become, there's just a lot more going on here. There's a lot larger international population, whether it's refugees or others. And just, I think the perspective of the city has progressed, and a lot more going on, which is one of the reasons I was able to come back and actually stay. But I think there also is a need, and I think especially for a center that's looking at international security, because again, it's about broadening the conversation and help people understand what that actually means in today's world, both globally and for the U.S. and even in our communities. So it's really, it will bring that perspective to the community, so that so the broad community can understand more about, international conflicts and, kind of root causes and how they affect us here in the United States. But also, looking at more and more at domestic and local issues and the kinds of lessons we can learn from global peace building here in our own community. So it, on many levels, it will give the community opportunities to engage. An example is last week we had an online event with a group of Israeli Palestinian women peace builders. It was a film screening and then a conversation. There are two groups. Women Wage Peace is the Israeli group, and Women of the Sun is the Palestinian group. And these women have been working together towards peace. And it's such an amazing story because I think that of all the conflicts has been so divisive in this country and in our communities. And for people, for the community and especially students to hear that Israelis and Palestinians can actually work together and, can work together towards peace. It's an amazing model. I think we all need to know their story, but also, again, take those lessons here. Not just the Israel-Gaza conflict, but all other kinds of things that are going on in the world and here at home. Really being able to take those models and work together. Always an inspiration for me. So it'll bring that aspect to the broader community, but also, within the university, students have been more and more interested in things like human rights, in global affairs, but especially they want practical experience. Want to know how they can do this work. So this center is also going to fill that gap in terms of providing these kinds of learning opportunities for students. So, we will have students that are involved. The main focus or the main pillar of the center will be the initiative is to work with students and experiential learning opportunities. There, substantive learning, there will be course learning, but also a lot of practical work that students will be doing for global partners, whether it's non-government organizations or government agencies, national organizations that are actually doing this kind of on the ground in other countries. Again, even here in the United States as well. So that's one of the main pillars. I think also the university has broadened its work, and the law school certainly. I've been amazed at how much the law school has grown in its experiential learning opportunities since I was here. I graduated in 1999. Of course, we had the Herbert Morgan Institute, which always remained a pillar, but there's so many other clinics and centers that have developed here. So I think it's the right moment in terms of where the community is, where the university is, where the law school is, and also the state of the world today. That people really want to understand what's happening, and students, they want to be able to engage in these hot topics.
So for those students who are, whether it's their potential law students, they are current law students, maybe they're not students anymore and they're alums of UC or other law schools, what advice do you have for those students who might be very, very internally wanting to make a difference or just allow a voice to be heard when all they're kind of seeing is the negativity side of it? Where can they go to get some of that positivity that you're trying to not just increase but also amplify?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually one that I'm always asking myself, because this is hard work, and we're not just going to solve the world's problems, and we're not going to have world peace tomorrow as much as we would like it. And the world does seem to be on fire. I'd say especially in the past year, I've been thinking a lot about how do we continue to be inspired. And I think it's probably obvious from when I was talking about my background is one, getting inspiration from the people who are actually experiencing these conflicts, right? So I just talked about the Israeli and Palestinian women peace builders. I mean, these are groups that are actually in Israel and Palestine. These are people that are living the war, right? So again, looking at them as inspiration. And I'll be honest, when I was planning that event and it came up quickly, it was just at a time where I was feeling just depleted and upset state of affairs and feeling really like, how am I going to get through this? But planning that event and working with these women, I just thought to myself, and there's a week where I was up 3 or 4 in the morning because I was working on this event, but also I'm developing this international security initiative. But I really thought to myself, this is what's going to keep me going. Being able to work with these women and just people who are experiencing the worst of their circumstances. Another example, I was talking before about my work in South Sudan. So the last time we were there doing those trainings and workshops was, I believe, summer of 2013. And my partner that I was working with, very involved in politics and everything in the region and knew both sides. On Wednesday, we were leaving on Friday, and on Wednesday she said to me, Julie, we need to get out because the stuff is about to hit the fan. And sure enough, just when we were leaving that Friday, the president of South Sudan sacked the vice president, which started a whole new civil war in the country. And 6 months later, Veronica said to me, well, probably most of the women that we are dead. So these things are devastating. But again, just being able to work with, I worked with a lot of people in Rwanda who survived that genocide, and they told me how they did it. And, the Syrian human rights defenders I was talking about. So I think, and such an important part of my work has always been to tell those stories of what's happening on the ground. Yes, that's all we hear in the media. The war and the conflict and the violence and the hate, but there is so much good happening on the ground. And so we need to hear those stories and we need to be inspired by them. And absolutely, students can get involved in all kinds of different ways. Certainly the International Security Initiative is a way for students to engage, through the university, but also working with some of these groups that I've mentioned, because we'll be working directly with them. I think, and just, I always tell students and young people who say, I want to be you. I want to do what you do. How do I do that? And I always say, one of the most important things that I found is if you find something you're passionate about, go for it. Don't let anything stop you. Sometimes it's going to be hard. But, if you decide on something, you can make it happen. Right? Life's tribulations, what's happening in the world. I've certainly overcome a lot of barriers in myself, including personal barriers in my life. But I've always just kept my eye on, because I like I said early on, I knew what I was passionate about and I knew what I wanted to do. So I've just kept my eye on that prize, and I just going and, find inspiration in the people that are doing the work. And, I think now more than ever, finding solidarity, even here at home, friends and family, but honestly, even people that aren't friends. Another thing I've been thinking more and more is about how divided we are here in the United States and in our communities, and it's been very, very hard. And I think there's, with all of us, a knee-jerk reaction. Don't believe what we believe or what we want them to believe or think they should believe. We just want to discount them. We want to get angry. And I've certainly done plenty of that. But, I remember I was reading an article in the Washington Post last fall, I think it was. The title was Why Young White Men Are Feeling Disaffected. And my first reaction, because of the work I do. But I said, you know what? If I was in another country doing my work, it would be very easy to say, okay, we have to look at both sides, understand where people are coming from, right? We have to mediate, we have to negotiate. So I thought, okay, if I am to be a true peace builder and, live by the Buddhist principles that I aspire to, then I have to be able to do the hard work and do this, right? I have to be able to do this at home because it's true. We'll never solve problems. Don't get to the root causes and understand where people are from. So yeah, those are various pieces of advice. And I'm always happy to talk. I'm gonna follow this career path or just, know how to get by right now.
And I think what you said there towards the end is an extremely important part of this building of peace and security. You're not going to get peace and security if all you're doing is belittling, yelling, and immediately downplaying the side that you believe is disrupting that peace and security. You have to be able to, there's too many of them. You have to be able to talk to them, speak to them, and in whichever way you can, envelop them into what might be the answer to that peace and security. So I think that's a really good thing to hear. I think, across the world and here today, there's a lot less of that, giving of the second chance to people. And so I think that's a good message. And we have many more times to talk with you. We have another episode that will be coming up where you'll be sitting down with a recent UC alum grad from Afghanistan and talking about her experiences, not only living in Afghanistan during some of these non-peaceful times, but also her journey to America and what she's doing now to help, not only her family, but others that feel the same way she did. And that will be an amazing episode for our listeners to look forward to. I think them getting to hear not only your background, but also where your passion for this comes from is also really fun and inspirational. And I think we need as many voices looking for that peace and security out there as we can at the moment. So I want to thank you for coming on, and I look forward to the many more episodes we're going to have with you. And also in the description of the episode, you will find Julie's information. So if you want to be able to learn more about what she's doing or what she has done, feel free to click on all of those and you can deep dive into even more of her history. So thank you again for being on today.
Thank you so much, Joey. And I'm looking forward to continuing these conversations.
Awesome. Thank you.